Biloxi, Mississippi. A quiet southern town with a burning core of corruption. In 1987, its secret burst violently to the surface, leaving 2 prominent citizens dead and ripping the top off a grand conspiracy.
On Mississippi's Gulf Coast, a judge and his politician wife are murdered in their home. The killer left few clues. It looked like a professional hit, and the investigation led nowhere. But the FBI refused to give up. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Until we could prove that federal laws had been broken, our hands were tied. It would take years to break the conspiracy of silence and reveal the tangled tale of corruption.
Biloxi, Mississippi. Monday, September 14th, 1987. It was a typically warm summer night in this quiet Gulf Coast town. The workday was over, and most residents had retreated to the tranquility of their homes. Like most of their neighbors, State Circuit Court Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were unwinding after a long day. Vincent Sherry was a prominent judge in Biloxi. Margaret was making plans to run for mayor. Both were fixtures at Biloxi's social and community functions. They were a happy couple who had raised 3 grown children. Tomorrow they planned to visit their daughter out of state. Their life together seemed ideal. They were just settling in for the night when an unexpected visitor came to the door.
What are you doing here with that? Can you look out?
And brought their perfect world to an end. The Sherrys were supposed to be with their daughter, so no one realized anything was wrong until 2 days later when the judge failed to show up in court on Wednesday, September 16th. Calls to the Sherrys' home went unanswered.
I'm sorry we can't take your call, but leave your message after the beep.
His colleagues at the court phoned Pete Halat, Vincent Sherry's friend and former law partner.
Morning, Pete Halat.
But he hadn't seen or heard from the judge either.
Well, he's supposed to be in court.
When did he leave?
I don't know.
All right.
No, wait, you let me call him at home and I'll figure out where he is.
All right.
After he left a concerned message on the Sherry's answering machine, Halat felt he'd better check on his friend personally.
Oh, I got the machine. Judge, it's Pete. They're looking for you in court. Is everything okay?
On his way out, he asked his junior partner, Charles Legier, to ride with him.
Charlie, hold on, time to saddle up. But I need some help, so let's go.
Listen, I'll give you a call back, okay? Yeah, bye-bye.
I figure if we go together, the two of us can fly.
As they drove, Legier tried to make conversation.
Finding out from lawyers.
Halat seemed distant, perhaps concerned about the judge. Both of the Sherry's cars stood in the driveway.
Well, the car's here.
I don't like it. Well, his car's here. He's supposed to be in court.
Halat asked Legier to go to the house, while he asked a neighbor if she'd seen the couple.
Just go ahead.
Legier rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He saw that the last 2 morning newspapers hadn't been picked up.
Pete Halat. I'm a partner.
The neighbor told Halat she hadn't seen the Sherrys for a couple of days, which she thought was odd since both of their cars were in the driveway. When Legier tried the Sherry's door, he found it unlocked. Something wasn't right.
Hey, Pete! Pete!
That's unusual.
Yeah, I was just knocking on it and the door opened up.
Halat, concerned by the open door, cautiously stepped inside. A few steps in, he made the gruesome discovery. Judge Sherry had been gunned down in his own home.
Hey, what's wrong?
They called the police. Authorities arrived to find the body of Vincent Sherry at the front of the house. In the back bedroom, they discovered Margaret. Because the couple was so prominent, the murder investigation became top priority. Detectives contacted the FBI's Biloxi field office. Though the FBI would not yet be officially involved, they offered the use of their agents and forensic laboratory. Inside, the police began scouring the crime scene for clues. They conducted blood spatter analysis to determine projectile angles. If they could figure out where the murderer had stood when he fired the shots, they might be able to reconstruct the crime.
Okay.
Inspector Robert Burris, a crime technician with the Biloxi Police Department, helped process the scene. He discovered a possible clue in the den.
There was blood trailing from his feet, actually going down between his legs a little ways, back to where he was laying. There was blood spatter on a double sliding glass door that was right beyond his head. And further examination in this room, I found some small pieces of foam rubber.
Burris didn't see where the foam rubber could have come from.
3 shell casings, want to get those?
A search of the house led him to one conclusion.
Now this foam rubber had to have been brought into the house. We examined every piece of material in this house, in every room of the house, all pillows, mattresses, everything else. There's no foam rubber tore up in this house. It was brought into the house. It does have gunshot residue on it. And basically about the only way it can get there is for a bullet to be fired through it.
For Burris, the significance of the foam rubber was obvious. The killer had used a homemade silencer. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, but found none of any value. They found 9 spent .22 caliber shell casings from a semi-automatic pistol, as well as the bullets used to murder the Sherrys. The position of the shells indicated that the shots had been fired in rapid succession. But most striking was how well the killer had covered his tracks. Nothing at the scene pointed to the killer's identity. He did his job well, and his mission was clear.
The lack of evidence in this house, such as items stolen, a struggle occurring, the absence of forced entry, no ransacking going on in the house whatsoever. A person came there for one thing, that was to kill the two Sherrys.
Special Agent Keith Bell from the Biloxi FBI field office agreed that this was a professional job. The Sherrys had been assassinated.
The crime scene appeared to be very limited as far as evidence remaining, which meant it was well planned, well executed, and professionally done. A small caliber weapon had been used. The foam rubber indicated that perhaps a silencer had also been used, and the Sherrys had been shot in the head, so it seemed to be a very professional job.
A multi-agency task force was assembled with Special Agent Keith Bell among its members. Investigators would spend days processing the crime scene. They grappled with a single question. Why had the Sherrys been murdered?
That was one of the main questions, that being why were both Judge Sherry and Margaret Sherry murdered? Because it was fairly obvious that Judge Sherry could have been killed during his morning or afternoon jogs around the neighborhood. So it was a real mystery why Margaret had been killed.
Investigators believed the answer might lie in the controversy over Biloxi's future. Some civic leaders hoped to transform the sleepy southern town on Mississippi's Gulf Coast into a flashy resort where casinos would attract tourist dollars. But with strip clubs already established in town, Margaret Sherry felt Biloxi's small-town charms were threatened. And the casinos would attract a criminal element. As a candidate for mayor, she had made powerful political enemies by trying to keep gambling out. Agent Bell wondered if Margaret was killed to silence her protests.
Margaret had been so outspoken politically in the community. She was known to be anti-gambling. And if elected mayor in 1989, she had planned to close down the remaining strip clubs in Biloxi. So there was always the possibility that she might have been the target, rather than Judge Sherry.
The task force would investigate Margaret's political enemies, but first, they'd question the Sherrys' friends and neighbors. Someone in the neighborhood must have seen something. But even people who'd known the Sherrys for years were reluctant to talk, fearing the specter of Biloxi's emerging criminal underworld.
The Sherry murders brought a dark cloud over the city of Biloxi. Many of the citizens in Biloxi were afraid to openly express their opinions. They saw that Margaret Sherry, who had been quite vocal and quite outspoken in political circles, had ended up dead, as had her prominent husband, Judge Sherry. So many citizens, after these murders, were hesitant even to be interviewed by FBI agents or by local police officers because they basically did not want their names tied into anything to do with this case.
If people wouldn't talk to the authorities, perhaps they would talk to Lynn Sposito, the Sherry's daughter. After being notified of her parents' murders, Lynn rushed to Biloxi from her home in North Carolina. Determined to find justice, she questioned everyone in the neighborhood. One family friend gave her a crucial piece of information. He described a suspicious car and driver in the neighborhood on the night of the murders. She took the lead to the police.
They identified a man who had seen a suspicious Ford Fairmont driving in front of the Sherry home on Monday night, September 14th, 1987.
Investigators tried to determine the identity of the driver based on the witness's description. Their search came up empty. But a few days later, not far from the Sherry's home, investigators found an abandoned car, a Ford Fairmont. A check on the vehicle's identification number showed it had been reported stolen the day before the murders. Police also learned that the tags on the car were not registered to the car. Realizing that this vehicle was probably the killer's getaway car, investigators towed it to a police garage to examine it further. Somewhere in the car, they hoped to find a key to the killer's identity. Less than a week after the brutal murders of Biloxi couple Vince and Margaret Sherry, investigators received their first promising lead. They recovered an abandoned car, matching the one witnesses described seeing the night of the murders. After contacting Agent Keith Bell about the discovery, investigators processed the car for clues. Inspector Robert Burris found something peculiar.
I was processing this vehicle, and one of the things I noted, the dome light had been dismantled and the bulb taken out of it. In other words, if you open the door, you ain't got no light. Both of the sun visors were in the down position. Whether you're riding around daytime or nighttime, you ain't gonna be able to see the people's face in it very well.
Investigators believed more than ever that this was the car used by the Sherry's killer. Anything found inside it was labeled, packaged, and shipped to the FBI labs in Washington, D.C. But FBI lab examiners would find nothing of evidentiary value. After Agent Bell arrived, he examined the license tag more closely. He discovered it had its own story to tell.
It was determined that the tag on the Ford Fairmont had been stolen from an abandoned vehicle in 1984, actually 3 years before these murders occurred. So what it meant was someone had removed the license plate, likely in 1984, had kept the license plate, and then when this major crime in the city of Biloxi was to occur, they pulled it off the shelf, so to speak.
With no other solid evidence, investigators hoped that following the trail of the stolen tag might lead to the killer. It was traced to an apartment complex where the original car had been abandoned 3 years earlier. Investigators contacted the apartment manager, who told them that prior to having the vehicle towed, he called a friend to come and strip it for parts. The manager's friend was a man that agents knew by name and reputation. Biloxi locksmith Lenny Sweatman. He was the last person to be seen near the car. Sweatman belonged to a loosely organized group of criminals the FBI was investigating in connection with another case. The group was known as the Dixie Mafia. FBI agent Keith Bell had connected the car used in the Sherry killings to Lenny Sweatman. Now, Bell wondered if the Dixie Mafia was linked to the Sherry murders. If Sweatman had a part in it, Bell believed that other Dixie Mafia members couldn't be far behind. He began looking into Sweatman's associates.
What that meant to us immediately, those of us familiar with the criminal associations on the coast, was that if Lenny Sweatman was involved in getting the tag for the hit car, then quite likely his close personal friend and longtime associate Mike Gillis, the strip club owner in Biloxi, might also be involved in these murders.
That's all right. Sometimes you know how it is. Oh, thanks.
Have a beer.
All right.
Gillich, who owned 3 strip clubs in Biloxi, was well known to local law enforcement. He was currently under investigation by the FBI in connection with a Dixie Mafia operation known as the Lonely Heart Scam.
See, he gets to him.
But Special Agent Bell needed a thread that connected the two investigations together. He started by familiarizing himself with the Lonely Heart scam. It was run out of Angola prison in Louisiana by a man named Kirksey Nix, the incarcerated kingpin of the Dixie Mafia.
No, the first model.
Nix would run ads in gay magazines, asking for money to help fictional gay men get out of trouble with the law. Through the scam, Nix was hoping to generate enough money to solve his own legal problems. He was serving a life sentence for murder.
From his jail cell at Angola, he coordinated what we've been referring to as the homosexual scam, which generated hundreds of thousands of dollars from individuals around the country, as well as some people in Canada. With this money, he intended to buy his way out, or attempt to buy his way out, of his Louisiana prison sentence.
Believing that they were helping gay men out of trouble, people who read the magazine ads would wire or mail money to a nearby Western Union. Nix would then call his contact on the outside, Mike Gillis. Gillis would then dispatch his bagman to retrieve the money.
Right. See you later.
Gillis made sure that the scam money was distributed to Dixie Mafia members and safely stashed away for Kirksey Nix.
Take care.
In the coming months, investigators developed more evidence in the Lonely Heart scam, but still had no direct link between these conspirators and the Sherry's killers. A year into the investigation, the murder case threatened to stall.
Hi.
Come in.
As the year stretched to 16 months, the Sherry's daughter, Lynn Sposito, grew increasingly frustrated. In January 1989, she hired a private investigator to rev up the inquest into her parents' murder.
He said he could make out the man.
And I'll give him a call, and I'll be on this case this afternoon.
The family had wanted very much to have a quick resolution to the case, but by early 1989, there'd still been no arrest. And of course, at this point, the FBI had not formally entered the case.
Nice to see you. Thank you for seeing
The lack of official FBI involvement hampered Bell's investigation. So when the private investigator paid him a visit, Bell welcomed his assistants, hoping they could share information. The two were old acquaintances from the private investigator's days in law enforcement. Since Agent Bell was unable to act officially, the private investigator would pursue a lead that looked promising. He would interview another Angola inmate. The private investigator and Bell hoped the inmate at Angola could finally link the Lonely Heart scam and the Sherry murders.
He met with all the right people, and because of his knowledge of the Dixie Mafia and from what he had learned from law enforcement authorities on the coast, he did go over to Angola and did talk to the right person over there.
The inmate's name was Bobby Joe Fabian. He was another known member of the Dixie Mafia, doing time for kidnapping and shooting a state trooper. Fabian claimed he had not been involved in the Sherry murders, but he had learned that fellow inmate Kirksey Nix had been. Fabian told the private investigator that Nix had had Judge Sherry killed because Sherry had allegedly stolen money from Nix's Lonely Heart scam. That wasn't all. He said Nix had been told of the theft by none other than Pete Halat, Sherry's former law partner. Halat, the man who had delivered the eulogy at the Sherry's funeral, was now implicated in their murders. Halat officially represented Nix on legal matters, but Fabian said Halat's role in the Lonely Heart scam was criminal, not legal. Halat was one of the people receiving money from Nix for safekeeping through Mike Gillis's bagman.
Don't forget to pick up next week at the other place.
And the ties between the outlaw and the lawyer went deep. Kirksey Nix's girlfriend and accomplice, LaRae Sharp, worked in Halat's office.
Where's he from?
Fabian said both LaRae Sharp and Pete Halat were stashing money from the scam in a safe deposit box for Kirksey Nix. And he said the amount had reached 6 figures. Thanks to Fabian, the link between the murders and the Lonely Heart scam had been made. And not only had Fabian given investigators a possible motive for the killings, he was also able to supply the name of the alleged hitman, an ex-con named John Ransom, who was believed to be living in Georgia. But tracking down Ransom would take time.
Anytime law enforcement people get together and start talking about notorious Dixie Mafia members, John Ransom comes up quite early in the conversation. He's a longtime alleged hitman for the Dixie Mafia.
In August of 1989, 2 years after the Sherry murders, Agent Bell now had enough evidence to warrant a full FBI investigation into the killings. Accompanied by the Sherry's daughter, Lynn Sposito, he approached the United States Attorney and the FBI with a demand to officially open the case.
So with the tying in of the scam to the murders, we knew we had some federal violations involved. We have wire fraud, we had mail fraud, and we perhaps had a hitman traveling from Georgia to Mississippi to kill the Sherrys. It was decided to open an official FBI investigation and join with local authorities in the investigation.
By now, however, suspect Pete Halat, Judge Sherry's former law partner, had been elected mayor of Biloxi. With a key suspect in such a high position, investigators encountered new roadblocks.
It became very difficult for the FBI to share all of its information with the local authorities. We are not saying that the local police were corrupt. What we are saying is that Mayor Halat put his own people in as Director of Public Safety and as police chief, so we were somewhat circumspect on what we shared with local authorities during that time period.
In August of 1989, as investigators attempted to unravel the truth about the Sherry's murders, informant Bobby Joe Fabian made a surprise move. He told his story about the Sherry murders to the TV news. Fabian hoped that by bringing attention to himself, Kirksey Nix would be less likely to have him killed for cooperating with authorities. Along with the report, the station broadcast a mugshot of John Ransom, the alleged hitman in the Sherry case. When Charles Legier, Pete Halat's junior partner, saw the photo, it surprised him. He recalled seeing Ransom outside the Sherry Halat law offices a few weeks before the murders.
Hello.
Legier shared his information with the task force. Major Randy Cook of the Harrison County Sheriff's Department took Legier's statement.
Legier said the reason he remembered Ransom was Ransom stepped off of a curve and came up to him and asked him, "Where's Vince Sherry's office at?" When Legier was interviewed, he recalled there was something unusual about the way Ransom stepped off of the curve. Ransom had a prosthesis on one leg.
Investigators learned that Ransom was now in a Georgia prison, serving time for another murder. When questioned about the Sherry murders, he refused to cooperate. As Cook further questioned Legier about the day he and Halat had found the bodies, an important detail emerged. Legier remembered that Halat had walked into the Sherry's living room, seen Judge Sherry's body, and said, "Vince and Margaret are dead." Cook relayed this to Agent Bell.
What was interesting was that Margaret's body was in the far back bedroom of the residence, and according to Chuck Legier, Pete Halat did not have time other than to briefly enter the front of the house and would have no way of knowing that Margaret's body was also in the very back bedroom.
In October of 1989, 2 years after the murders, Agent Bell knew Halat was involved, but he still lacked enough evidence for an arrest. Even so, he felt it was time to confront Mayor Halat. It would be a quiet warning, man to man.
And I let Mayor Halat know that I thought his knowledge of the Sherry murders was much greater than what he had shared with law enforcement authorities up to that point. And I recall also telling him that the FBI would continue working on this case until it was totally solved. My recollection is he smiled and did not have much else to say.
As a lawyer, Halat knew Bell would need more concrete evidence in order to secure a conviction. What he likely didn't realize was the depth of Bell's commitment to bring him to justice. Three years had passed since Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were murdered in their Biloxi, Mississippi home. FBI Special Agent Keith Bell had connected the killings to members of the Dixie Mafia and to Judge Sherry's friend and one-time law partner, Pete Halat. The alleged triggerman, John Ransom, was refusing to talk. In January of 1990, Agent Bell and Major Randy Cook of the Harrison County Sheriff's Department drove to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary to question another possible accomplice.
This is Special Agent.
A man named Bill Rhodes. Rhodes, a known associate of John Ransom, was willing to cooperate. He told them that in early 1987, Ransom had contacted him about driving the getaway car in a crime to take place in southern Mississippi. Ransom had said a judge would be murdered and that the pay was $10,000.
There were certain promises made to Rhodes by Ransom that I know certain people in Biloxi that if you'll help me on this and you'll have the run of Biloxi anytime you want it.
So in March of 1987, Rhodes went to Biloxi and met with Ransom and a man named Pete. It was Pete who specifically asked Rhodes and Ransom to do the hit. Rhodes said he also met with Mike Gillis, the Biloxi strip club owner, who would supply the money once the hit was done. But 5 months later, before they could do the job, Rhodes was arrested on an unrelated bank robbery charge, and Ransom got cold feet, afraid Rhodes would turn on him. The information helped the case inch forward, but Agent Bell and Officer Cook still felt that Ransom held the missing pieces. Another year would pass without much progress. In late 1990, the investigators went to the Bostic Correctional Institute in Georgia, where Ransom was serving time. Finally, Ransom agreed to talk. He admitted that he delivered a .22 caliber pistol to Lorraine Sharp, Kirksey Nix's girlfriend. But Ransom insisted that he did not do the job. Based on what Ransom said, Lorraine's involvement was starting to look bigger than simply stashing scam money in a safe deposit box.
All finished?
Finished, thank you.
Through his contact with Sharp, Nix learned that the investigation was heating up He worried that his girlfriend might talk, so he tried to head off the problem by putting out a contract on her life. But in late 1990, Agent Bell arrested her for her participation in the murders, inadvertently saving her from Nix's gunman. During a polygraph test, Sharp denied her involvement in the Lonely Heart scam and the Sherry murders. But the machine called her bluff. When Bell and his team added her statements to their existing stacks of evidence, they were ready to bring indictments against several key players. Mike Gillis, John Ransom, LaRae Sharp, and Kirksey Nix were charged as conspirators in the Sherry murders. Notably missing from the list was Pete Halat. The case against Halat would have to wait until they had enough evidence for a murder conviction. For now, the FBI would look to convict the others on conspiracy to commit murder.
So many of the questions came up, why didn't y'all indict Pete Halat early on when you indicted everybody else? Well, at the time, we didn't have the hard evidence that you would have to arrest a mayor and prosecute him.
The conspiracy trial produced several key witnesses that would help investigators piece together the complex scheme.
Mr. Gant, you stated that all these people here murdered.
Robbie Gant, Gillis's bagman for the Lonely Heart scam, testified for the prosecution. His testimony helped prosecutors link the Sherry murders to the scam. All 4 defendants were found guilty. Nix was given 15 years in addition to the life sentence he was already serving for murder. Gillis also received a 15-year prison term. Ransom got 10 years, and LaRae Sharp 1.
I'll pay you for it. Get your hands on the order in the court.
With these conspirators behind bars and the Lonely Heart scam no longer operational, Bell moved on to his next objective.
We decided not to end the Sherry investigation after the 1991 initial convictions because at that time we had not proven who had actually shot the Sherrys, and also Pete Halat had not been indicted or convicted at that point. And we all felt strongly that Pete Halat had played a major role in the scam and in the murder plot. So we were determined to continue the investigation to see if we could get enough evidence to indict and convict Mr. Halat and the actual shooter.
In late July of 1992, Agent Bell got the break he was looking for. Following the conspiracy trial, Mike Gillis was desperate to find a way out of prison. He contacted one of his associates in Biloxi and asked him to approach Robbie Gant with an offer. Gant told Agent Bell about it.
And the associate had offered Robbie Gant $20,000 if Gant would recant his testimony against Gillis and sign a false affidavit stating that he had been threatened by me to testify against Gillis, to testify falsely against Gillis.
Gant agreed to wear a wire and get the offer from Gillis's accomplice on tape. Gant met with him in Mississippi. This time, Gant's tape was rolling when Gillis's associate reiterated the bribe. Gant accepted as Bell had instructed. Now, Bell had the evidence he needed to turn up the heat on Gillis. Just the man who could tell the story from the inside. By 1993, 6 years after the double murder of Vince and Margaret Sherry, FBI agent Keith Bell had put 4 members of the Dixie Mafia behind bars. But he still had no formal murder convictions against those involved. And Mayor Pete Halat, the suspected mastermind of the case, was still free and running the city of Biloxi. In fact, the year before, Mayor Halat had broken ground on the city's first big casino.
The victory for our town and our people.
The press still hounded Halat about his involvement in the Sherry murders, but he remained adamant about his innocence. Bell continued to work his plan. He used the bribe Robert Gant had recorded on tape to level another charge against Mike Gillis, already in jail. Now Bell indicted Gillis for witness bribery and witness tampering for trying to buy off Gant. And that did the trick.
No doubt the most important turning point was in October of 1993 when Mike Gillis finally decided to cooperate and tell the story of this whole case from an insider's point of view. And that's what really allowed us to bring final resolution to this investigation.
After the years of painstaking work Bell had spent on the case, it was a satisfying moment. Finally, it seemed his patience and ingenuity were paying off. Gillis was in no hurry to accrue more jail time. Bell's relentless pressure had persuaded him to cut a deal before the bribery trial even began. The Dixie Mafia member would tell what he knew about the murders.
Mr. Gillis has
Maybe now, Bell could get the convictions he knew were long overdue. But for a career criminal like Mike Gillis, adjusting to life on the right side of the law wasn't easy. At first, he tried to bluff his way out.
Of course, it always takes some time, a period of weeks, to develop some degree of trust and to be able to communicate with someone like this who, for the first time, has decided to leave his lifelong role as a criminal and start cooperating with the FBI.
When deception didn't work, Gillis had no alternative. He had to tell the truth. Now, for the first time, Bell heard the story from an inside source. Gillis knew all the details.
Mike was the center point. Mike knew Kirksey Nix. Mike knew Pete Halat for years. And in fact, when Kirksey Nix was looking for an attorney over in the coast area to represent him on various matters, Mike Gillis introduced Nix into Pete Halat.
He confirmed that Pete Halat was indeed behind the plan to murder the Sherrys, and that the plot grew directly out of the Lonely Heart scam of Angola prison inmate Kirksey Nix. Some months before the Sherrys' deaths, Halat had closed the safe deposit box he and Nix's girlfriend LaRae Sharp had access to, effectively cutting off her access to the money. He then transferred the money into a box only he and Judge Sherry could use. Motivated by greed, he stole $100,000 cash from there. As Nix's trusted accomplice, Halat could blame the theft on Judge Sherry. Next, he went to Mike Gillis with news of the theft.
Mr. Gillis stated that Pete Halat approached Mr. Gillis himself in late 1986 and told Mr. Gillis that much of the money was missing, supposedly around $100,000. and Mr. Halat blamed Judge Sherry for taking the money. Mr. Halat knew that Kirksey Nix would be very furious about this.
It is not known who ordered Margaret's death, but as a fierce opponent of corruption, she posed a threat to the underworld forces hoping to control Biloxi. With Margaret dead, Halat could be free to run the town.
I got the contacts. I've already started the ball too.
Gillis said that he and Halat planned the murders. Ransom and Rhodes provided the murder weapon. But when they passed on doing the hit, Gillis found a replacement. A Texas-based petty criminal named Thomas Holcomb. Holcomb would be paid $20,000 to murder Judge Sherry and his wife. Gillis had also helped provide the car with the help of locksmith Lenny Sweatman. In October of 1996, agents arrested hitman Thomas Holcomb in Texas on murder charges. That same month also saw the arrest that Agent Bell had anticipated and worked 9 years to achieve.
An innocent man, and you're gonna put the cuffs on me?
Let me read you your rights.
The arrest of Pete Halat for the murders of the Sherrys.
You can, anything you say can and will be held against you.
Kirksey Nix and LaRae Sharp were indicted on 52 counts, including fraud, money laundering, and murder. Halat was tried and convicted in the summer of 1997, a full decade after the crimes were committed. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Also tried and convicted were Kirksey Nix and Thomas Holcomb, the hitman. Both were sentenced to life. LaRae Sharp, Nix's girlfriend, got 5 years.
I think a lot of citizens in Biloxi now realize that there are a lot of dedicated professional law enforcement people who will do everything they can to protect the community and work hard to solve major crimes. Perhaps the legacy, you might say, of the case for the criminal element is that they realize after seeing this case that they can commit a crime one day and think they're getting away with it a year later, but it could come back 10 years later and get them.
While the Sherry's killers were finally brought to justice, Margaret Sherry's dream of a Biloxi free of gambling was never realized. Instead, Biloxi has become a resort town filled with casinos and neon lights. The sleepy southern town is gone forever, along with the woman who lost her life trying to save it.
So you got what I need?
On the streets of New Orleans,
All right.
drug money bought the city's cops. Officers became the strong arm of drug lords, brutalizing anyone who dared speak out.
Kim! Help!
With police tainted by greed, undercover agents would have to put their lives on the line to bring down the corrupt officers who hid behind a shattered shield.
In a city awash in narcotics, the drug lords have all the power, even over the police. Corruption in New Orleans grew like cancer, eating away at public safety and threatening to destroy the city. Lured by easy wealth, crooked cops began breaking the laws they were sworn to uphold. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When it became clear that the police could no longer police themselves, the FBI had to get involved. It was a case where the line between friends and enemies became dangerously blurred.
New Orleans, 1993. Tourists packed the city looking for a good time, not all of it legal. Cocaine was in demand, and the dealers cashed in. It was a violent business. For protection, the drug lords turned to those whose duty was to serve and protect. The cops. Officers lined their pockets while enforcing the will of the dealers. They controlled turf like thugs, terrorizing innocent civilians. Agent Stan Haddon of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit in New Orleans was aware of the growing problem.
Our intelligence told us that there was a great variety of corruption taking place among many different officers on the department. However, the one thing that seemed to be the most pervasive was that officers were out there working with drug dealers on the street, were protecting drug dealers on the street, and were stealing money and drugs from drug dealers on the street.
One such drug dealer was Terry Adams, known on the streets as Scaboo. He was a small-time operator who was being extorted by Officer Sammy Williams.
So you got what I need? Come on now, give me what I need.
But this time, the protection money Scaboo paid Williams wasn't enough. On Christmas Eve, the officer demanded that Scaboo pay him $10,000 cash by 6 p.m. If Scaboo failed to show, Williams threatened to beat him and guaranteed him 20 years to life. That evening, at 5 p.m., Special Agent Stan Haddon was finishing up some last-minute work. About to go home, he took one last call. It was Scaboo. His time was running out. He told Haddon that he was being blackmailed, but didn't have the $10,000 the corrupt cop was demanding in less than an hour.
What are the name of the officers?
When Scaboo contacted me, we realized that that was our best chance to do something about police corruption. And I immediately arranged to meet him and debrief him in person. There was no way we could get everything together by 6 o'clock. By the time I met with him, it was 30 minutes before the deadline.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that.
Haddon and his partner quickly hashed out a plan.
This is, I think, the best one we've got.
Scaboo would meet the officer as arranged, but he'd be wearing an FBI wire. The agents couldn't arrange $10,000 on such short notice. Scaboo would have to convince the cop to accept smaller payments over several meetings.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, they could be rough. Well, you know that. You worked with them.
Yeah, I have.
Assured by Haddon that he would be under constant surveillance, Scaboo took his position. Officer Sammy Williams was still on duty when he arrived with a prisoner cuffed in the back seat of his cruiser. Williams drove Scaboo to a deserted spot behind a seafood market. He ordered him to throw the $10,000 into the trunk. Scaboo told Williams he only had $3,000 now, but would pay the rest later. If the cop arrested Scaboo, he'd never get his payoff. Agents hoped Williams would agree to meet him again for more of the money. He did, and the FBI had it all on tape. Haddon believed this one incident could lay the groundwork for exposing more corruption in the New Orleans Police Department.
Our main objective was to try and create a strategy that would enable us to prosecute as many bad officers as we possibly could.
In the days that followed, agents, along with prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office, began to plan their operation, codenamed Shattered Shield. Assistant U.S. Attorney Al Winters would advise agents every step of the way on what would be needed to convict the dirty cops.
We were involved really from day one. We met with the case agents on numerous occasions and discussed exactly what we were interested in being developed as far as evidence in the case.
As with most corruption cases, the FBI's strongest evidence would likely come from wiretaps. According to Special Agent Karen Jenkins, an FBI wiretap specialist, securing them isn't easy.
Title III is a court-authorized intercept or wiretap. It's very difficult to get one approved. It's a lengthy process, very time-consuming. Basically, we have to have approval by FBI officials to get one, and beyond that, we have to have the review and approval by Department of Justice officials. Finally, a federal judge will make the final determination as to whether or not one is authorized.
After delivering 2 more payoffs to Officer Williams, Scaboo had won his trust. Now the FBI seized the opportunity to take the operation to the next phase. Scaboo would approach Williams with a proposition. The volume of drug business was going to increase, and Scaboo would need more cops to protect it. If Williams was interested in higher payoffs, he would need to hire more dirty cops to handle the expansion. Williams took the bait. Scaboo met with him for another recorded payoff in mid-January 1994.
Don't forget now.
But this time, Williams showed up with another officer. He turned out to be Len Davis, Sammy Williams' partner.
Don't forget now, man.
It wasn't surprising. Davis was known in the projects as a gangster with a badge.
It's not very good. See if you can make it.
Reviewing the tapes, Haddon discovered a problem.
What are we listening to?
Both Davis and Williams used the coded language of the drug trade. To make charges stick, the FBI had to record the officers using language that a jury would understand. Haddon pressed Scaboo to get Williams and Davis to use words like dope so there'd be no doubt at trial. But when Scaboo told the cops the dope is in, Davis suspected something was up.
If you're in the police business and somebody starts using words that are that overt and that plain, that immediately makes you suspicious that this person is trying to set you up.
Davis shoved Scaboo into the car and told Williams to drive. The agents would be too conspicuous on the deserted streets. If they pursued the cops now, they would put Scaboo's life at greater risk. The only thing they could do was sit patiently and listen to the wire. When the car came to a stop, Davis's rage ignited. He yelled that Scaboo was never to say the word dope again.
They immediately took him to a deserted location, aggressively searched him. You can hear the Velcro ripping loose on his clothes and stuff. And that was a very tense moment.
Davis insisted that he wouldn't go to jail for careless talk. He and Williams stripped Scaboo looking for a wire. Scaboo was sure he was going to die. Miraculously, they never found him.
He's clean. He's clean. He's clean. I'm not going to jail behind you.
trust was restored.
You understand me?
Scaboo continued his protection deal with Davis and Williams. For the next job, the cops drove him to a store where a drop-off was to take place. Inside, Scaboo checked a bag at the counter. He passed the ticket to an agent posing as a buyer, who then retrieved the bag. Williams and Davis watched as each transaction went down. They were promised $1,000 for every kilo of cocaine they protected. For them, the deals meant easy money. Davis and Williams met Scaboo behind stores and alleyways for the protection payoffs. The FBI recorded every word. Gradually, Operation Shattered Shield was building a solid case against police corruption. The recordings continued into the spring of 1994. Once agents were sure Davis and Williams were solidly on board, the FBI prepared to expand the investigation. With still more cocaine to guard, Williams and Davis would need to recruit more dirty cops. Federal agents hoped to snare every one of them. But agents knew the officers may become suspicious of Scaboo's rapidly growing drug business. They needed to bring in a big-time dealer, someone whose status as a kingpin would explain the larger shipments.
You like some? Sure. Okay.
Hadden called on Juan
What we're doing
Jackson,
down here is,
an FBI agent trained
bringing in
specifically
JJ
for working
here
undercover.
to represent a drug kingpin from up in the East Coast.
At that time, I was in New York City, and I'd been contacted to come down to just be interviewed and go over the actual case. A lot of times they'll be looking for a certain person, height, weight, color, or whatever, to infiltrate or get into a certain group.
Known as JJ, the agent would act as Scaboo's cocaine supplier, proposing to use New Orleans as a hub to store and distribute his product nationwide.
I was a high-level drug dealer. I played that role, and I had ties where my operation was in both Miami and in New York City.
With the arrival of JJ, Shattered Shield was about to grow from a minor drug business to a booming enterprise. Jackson was one of the FBI's best undercover agents. He was smart and experienced. But his life would be in the hands of the informant, Scaboo, who had no training. Jackson needed to build complete trust with Scaboo, or they'd both be dead.
The informant, because he lives that world, is probably for me anyway, the most important, because he himself has been there. He's been around these people. If he's not believable, it's not going to work. And I think that was the big thing for me down there, was to make sure that we were going to be believable.
Jackson and Scaboo rehearsed their roles again and again, preparing for the real test with Davis and Williams. Jackson, federal agent from the north, and Scaboo, a southerner who had dealt drugs all his life, had to forge a common history. Their story would be that they had met in the Army. After their stint was up, they'd kept in touch. They hashed and rehashed details of their friendship, habits, fake memories that they'd have to know cold, and when to say them. They were dealing with criminals who could run thorough background checks and who were free to use deadly force.
We knew that whatever we had to keep it simple, but we had to make sure that we remembered certain things. The biggest thing I thought that helped us was my initials, my nickname. So no matter how many times they would ask him, what's his name? He believably said, because he only knew, JJ.
In April, the FBI was ready to introduce JJ into the operation. He arrived at a hotel carrying what was supposed to be a drug payment of $100,000. For the first time, Williams and Davis caught a glimpse of the big-time dealer. Their perceptions would be critical.
The first encounter was in the Sheraton Hotel. They were going to stand at a distance and just observe. It was another test to see if they were willing to do what they were going to do. Hey, I don't know how it's going to work. They could arrest me right now and take me off and, I'm down, because it was supposed to be drug money. So it was a test.
Scaboo told the cops about JJ and his plan to use New Orleans as a transport hub for his cocaine business. Davis and Williams carefully studied JJ's every move. Jackson was creating his character before their eyes. It would become his full-time identity, and it would have to hold up under scrutiny. Everything depended on what the cops thought they had seen, and if they believed the cash exchange was genuine. The plan worked. The cops were convinced that JJ was the real deal. The FBI was now poised to take Operation Shattered Shield to the next level. By the spring of 1994, the FBI's Operation Shattered Shield, targeting New Orleans police officers involved in the city's drug trade, was in place. Posing as a drug kingpin named JJ, undercover Special Agent Juan Jackson worked with Scaboo, the drug dealer turned FBI informant. Scaboo rented a hotel room for JJ to meet officers Len Davis and Sammy Williams for the first time.
What's up, man? What's up?
That was showtime. That was a big deal. On any first meeting with any bad guys, a million things are going through your mind. I mean, are you going to be believable? Is anything going to happen that's going to change their attitude? It's either going to work from here or we're all going to go home.
Playing the street-savvy drug dealer, JJ insisted that everyone strip to establish trust. For this first meeting, Jackson didn't wear a wire. He didn't need to. The room had been thoroughly wired by the FBI for audio and video recording. Then, in a bold gamble, JJ invited them to search the room. Because they were cops, Davis and Williams knew how to find a room wire. But JJ bet his life on the FBI's technicians. The cops never found the wires. JJ was beginning to build trust with the officers. But officers are trained to sniff out deception.
I mean, you got to think that I'm meeting with two police officers. Because of the guns, you also always have to remember the threat. You always have to be conscious of the threat and remember exactly where they are and what they're going to do and where the weapons are.
With the cops convinced for the moment, JJ began to discuss the proposal approved by case agent Stan Haddon.
And he played the role of a big-time drug dealer from New York who was using New Orleans as a transshipment point, simply as a storage point, where he could bring dope in, leave it for a while, have it guarded and protected by the officers, and then thereafter have it shipped out to other points unknown.
For their role, JJ promised to pay them $5,000 every day the cops guarded the warehouse. Williams and Davis were enthusiastic about the plan, even offering advice. The cops urged JJ to hire young drivers, give them company uniforms with name tags, and put signs on the sides of the trucks to resemble legitimate companies. For the FBI, the meeting was flawless.
The meeting went off without a hitch. They bought JJ's act. They believed him completely, and they also said the magic word cocaine, which got it clearly established on tape that we were talking about the officers protecting a drug operation.
From that May meeting, the plan moved quickly. The FBI found a warehouse that met their needs, far from public view and rival drug dealers. JJ and Scaboo met Davis and Williams for a walkthrough.
JJ and Scaboo would meet with Len Davis and Sammy Williams at the warehouse for what we call the pre-deal meet. There at that meeting, they would discuss when the dope was coming in, how long it was going to stay in town, and how much money JJ was going to pay for the officers to guard the dope.
Once inside, Davis told JJ that he had half a dozen more officers lined up to guard the cocaine shipments. They would work in 10-hour shifts. Uniformed police outside guarding payloads of cocaine inside. Up to $250,000 worth in each load. At that June meeting came the first big payments from JJ. More than $10,000. Everything is going smoothly. But one aspect of the warehouse plan bothered Assistant U.S. Attorney Al Winters.
Basically, what we told the agents, unless we had evidence, irrefutable evidence, that these people knew they were guarding cocaine, we couldn't prosecute it.
Because the cops stood guard outside the warehouse, they could later claim they didn't know that drugs were inside.
I think having some sort of video or photographic
Haddon had to
record
find a way to prove Davis's recruits saw the drug shipments.
Or maybe even see.
His team mulled over ways to bring the drugs into plain view.
We need them to implicate themselves. Here, I'll take those.
The officers would have to be recorded, seeing and discussing the shipment. Shipments were delivered to the warehouse one weekend every month according to schedule. Then, in mid-July, the FBI sent a shipment that the guards didn't expect. With one load already in the warehouse, an FBI agent dressed as a courier brought another shipment. The driver shocked the guard cops by unloading the cocaine in plain sight. This was too overt for Len Davis's crew. They didn't want to see drugs at all.
They didn't want the vehicles outside the warehouse unloading drugs and stuff where the officers could actually see it.
Quickly, get down here.
The cops called Sammy Williams on a cell phone JJ had given him. Williams called JJ, and JJ and Scaboo raced to the warehouse. JJ responded like a hot-headed drug dealer.
I was arguing with this guy. I mean, we were actually screaming at each other. What are you doing? Where are you? Whatever. And he's observing this. There's a police officer calling Lynn, telling him all what's going on and how this doesn't look good.
To the cops, this whole drug operation was starting to look dangerously unprofessional. Concerned, the driver made another call. Sammy Williams arrived to straighten out the problem.
Okay. See what I gotta deal with? Leave it. I got it. See what I got 5 minutes.
JJ explained it was the driver's screw. He asked that the cops escort the van to the city limits right away. Despite the risk, the episode worked. It showed that the cops knew what was inside the warehouse.
Right, what's going on?
Take him to the edge of town, all right?
And it was all videotaped.
Just let him go.
Let him go.
But the episode raised doubts for the cops. Either JJ was an amateur, or he was part of a sting. Either way, they'd be watching him more closely now. Shattered Shield wore on into the summer as all of New Orleans baked.
About 100 degrees out here.
In August, guarding the warehouse proved hard duty. The cops complained of the wear and tear on their engines from running the air conditioning all day in the heat. They wanted a vehicle that was more comfortable, that could also endure the long hours, perhaps a van. The officers asked Len Davis to provide one, and Davis brought their request to JJ. For the investigation, it was a huge break. The sweaty cops had just handed the FBI a golden opportunity.
It was a stroke of luck. One day, Lynn approached me and said that the officers were complaining that they're running their cars in air conditioning And the cars are starting to overheat, you know, they're burning gas, you know, on and on and on. Once we were able to rent the van and put the listening device inside, we were able to hear a lot more conversations.
The FBI quickly filed the paperwork to get court-authorized wiretaps for the van. Technicians carefully installed state-of-the-art microphones. They had to yield top sound quality for months with no maintenance. The van was a perfect Trojan horse for getting inside information.
I picked this out myself.
The shiny new van made the officers suspicious. They wondered if anyone could have tampered with it.
It ain't nothing wrong with it.
They wanted to know exactly where Davis had gotten the vehicle.
I've never seen this vehicle before.
Because JJ had so completely won Davis's trust, Davis told the cops that he himself had rented the van.
Is it all right for you?
He vouched for it.
It's okay.
That calmed their fears.
I picked it out myself. What do you think?
Len Davis didn't want anyone upsetting his flow of payments. The FBI would soon learn just how ruthlessly Davis guarded his interests. After 3 months of Shattered Shield, more and more New Orleans cops came under the FBI's investigation. Len Davis and undercover agent JJ met often to discuss drug shipments and payoffs for police protection. Davis made frequent threats.
They'll tell you, we run this city. We do whatever we want to do. They let me know that very many times. If they feel like they want to shut it down, they'll shut it down.
But Davis liked the money. JJ knew that as long as the money flowed, he would never shut the operation down. Davis called the shots for the other officers. He recruited and set the schedules using his cell phone. But he complained about his bill. So JJ offered Davis a new cell phone, free of charge. It was one more way the FBI could record the cops' knowing involvement in drug trafficking. The wires the FBI had planted in the warehouse van were paying off. One night, 2 guards on the graveyard shift brought prostitutes to the van. The wires picked up everything, even the cops' sexual indiscretions. When Jenkins heard this, she immediately phoned JJ. The situation was a chance to catch the cops off balance. JJ called Davis to complain and to see what they'd get on tape. He told Davis he had checked out the warehouse and found that the cops weren't protecting it. JJ wasn't paying cops to have sex. He ordered Davis to straighten things out. Davis arrived in a fury. His henchmen were threatening to ruin his whole operation.
Lynn was upset. Lynn was a businessman through and through. Lynn wanted it to work exactly one way. And he was really upset that I was upset. And he got up. He came out there and just kicked everybody out.
JJ's call brought Davis down on him hard that night. But the episode triggered deep suspicions among the dirty cops. They now felt sure that JJ was the problem and believed they could run the operation better themselves. They discussed ways to kill JJ. Their plans alarmed Agent Karen Jenkins.
When I heard those conversations where they were threatening to do harm to our undercover agent, it sent a chill down my spine. It scared me. Before I came to New Orleans, I had worked with JJ in another office, so I knew him personally, and I was very concerned.
Despite the threats to his life, JJ was resolute, keeping the cops engaged with plans to further expand the operation. He promised Davis that the largest shipment would arrive before Christmas. After that, he would move the deliveries to another part of the city.
So that's what the phone I'm talking about. You with that?
All the time, JJ had to draw out more evidence on tape without making Davis suspicious.
He was very careful. He watched everything. He paid attention to everything I said. There were conversations where we'd talk, and I'd use the word cocaine. He would count the times I used it. And he would tell me, Jay, you said cocaine 5 times. Jay, you said kilos 5 times. So I had to be careful.
At the same time, Haddon and his team had to defuse another plot they overheard. The cops were threatening to kill the couriers and steal the cocaine. The agents scrambled delivery times and mapped new routes to and from the warehouse to keep the cops off balance. With so many dirty cops, the FBI couldn't make a clean sweep from the outside alone. Agents would need someone powerful in the police force to be a strong ally. Despite the danger of leaks, they decided to seek help from within the New Orleans Police Department. October 1994 brought fresh changes to New Orleans in a new police chief, Richard Pennington.
So, how do you like our first?
Pennington was an outsider from Washington, D.C., hired in the hopes of reforming the Crescent City's crooked police force.
Since you're just moving in, actually, why don't you have a seat?
The FBI invited the new chief for a meeting.
News is not all good, fortunately.
Then Haddon introduced JJ. He informed Pennington that Operation Shattered Shield was uncovering corruption deep in the force that he was about to head. His cooperation would be critical for the success of Operation Shattered Shield. On the streets of New Orleans, Davis and Williams were still on active duty, cruising their territory. Len Davis had a long list of public complaints against him. During their rounds one night that October, Davis and Sammy Williams patrolled the Desire housing project. Seeing the pair of cops approach, 2 youths took flight. Williams chased one teenager down, bludgeoned him, and left him bleeding in the street. At that moment, Kim Groves, the victim's aunt, decided that police had terrorized their neighborhood long enough.
Who's gonna pay the bill? Is that what we done?
The next day, Groves, a 32-year-old mother of 3, filed a complaint against Len Davis and his partner. She cited the pair for police violence. An officer alerted Davis about the complaint.
Do you want to know his name? Officer Davis, do you know him?
Yeah, this is definitely
Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike McMahon saw the report.
She reported not only Sammy Williams, who did the actual brutality, but Len Davis as well, who had nothing to do with that pistol whipping. And at that point, Len Davis became enraged.
For Davis, Groves' complaint came at the worst possible time. It would bring unwanted attention just as the new police chief was coming on board.
I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get her.
Len Davis vowed to get revenge. The same day that Kim Groves filed her complaint, Richard Pennington was sworn in as New Orleans' new chief of police. That marked the start of Shattered Shield's final phase, the shift from an FBI effort to a partnership with a city desperate to clean house. That very night, Agent Jenkins recorded several conversations that would show just how rotten some of the city's men in blue had become. The first call was cryptic. Hours after Pennington was sworn in, Len Davis made a call on his cell phone. He gave an order to an unknown man.
I need you to do a 30 for me.
The FBI taped the conversation, but because Davis spoke in modified police code, agents didn't know what it meant. While they attempted to decipher it, agents recorded a second, more disturbing call. This time, the unknown man called Davis. As they spoke, a police dispatcher announced a murder in the Desire housing project. The victim's name, Kim Groves. When Davis heard the news, he cried, "Rockabye." It was the triumphant cry of a killer. When he later heard it, the call shocked Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike McMahon.
As soon as he confirmed the name of Kim Groves, Davis shut off the radio, and then on the wiretap conversation over the cell phone just exulted in a primal scream of delight that indeed Kim Groves was dead.
When agents reviewed the tapes and checked the phone records, they discovered that the man who spoke to Davis was Paul Hardy. Davis had asked Hardy for a 30, a police code normally used to report a homicide. But that night, Davis used it as an order for the murder of Kim Groves. Canvassing the projects, agents quickly learned that Hardy was a known drug dealer who led a small gang of thugs. With the help of 2 accomplices, Hardy acted quickly, coldly, and for just $300. As he sped away over a bridge, Hardy threw the barrel of the gun into the canal and handed the body of the gun to an accomplice for safekeeping.
What's up, man?
When the FBI realized Davis's role in the murder, agents grew more concerned for JJ's safety. JJ met with Davis soon afterward. He looked carefully for signs that Davis was anxious or upset.
Yeah, what's up?
He saw none. The murder of Kim Groves seemed to have relaxed Davis.
Yeah. Look, let me call you back.
JJ still had to play his part, the role of a drug lord. Though uneasy, he was careful not to talk about the murder.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
I wanted to ask a lot of questions about it. I couldn't. The only thing I'd ask him was, is there anything different happening since the last time I was here? He said no. And we went on just like nothing ever happened. Is he a cold-blooded killer? I could probably do you in a minute? Yeah.
Having seen what Davis and his cops could do, JJ had every reason to believe that he could be next. He was unaware that they were already planning ways to kill him. Days after Len Davis ordered the murder of Kim Groves, the FBI learned of more threats by Davis's men. A New Orleans police officer assisting in Operation Shattered Shield received an anonymous threat. It came with Kim Groves' obituary. The message was clear. Death would come to those who talked. That day, Stan Haddon learned of still more threats against JJ and the other agents. Agent Jenkins had recorded 5 cops at the warehouse plotting to kill the couriers and JJ.
Oh, yeah.
Then they would steal the cocaine and sell it themselves. Haddon had no choice. The FBI had to wrap up the operation before it was too late.
Once we realized that the lives of our undercover agents were at serious risk, then we had to react to it. We had to do something.
The FBI needed to move up their plans for the big shipment JJ had promised to Davis. A cocaine shipment so large that it would require a half dozen more cops to guard it. But Haddon needed a location unfamiliar to the cops, a place where the FBI could mobilize quickly. He and his team scouted the Mardi Gras truck stop on Elysian Fields Avenue. The spot had good highway access. It also posed little risk to the public in the event of a shootout. The cocaine would arrive on an 18-wheeler, then be loaded into cars and escorted by the cops out of the city. Every detail had to be mapped out. The plan would require the coordination of 85 agents positioned strategically along the routes. When Davis put out the word about a huge November 18th shipment, he enticed new recruits. As a load of cocaine worth $250,000 arrived, Davis, Williams, and their crew stood ready as protection. Agents posing as drivers moved the shipment. From the command center, Haddon and Jenkins kept watch of the whole operation. There were hundreds of ways the truck stop scenario could go wrong. With the undercover agents' lives on the line, there was no margin for error. The cocaine was divided in 2 loads. Williams escorted one, Davis followed the other. They shepherded the couriers to the edge of town, shielding them from other drug gangs and from the law.
To make it easier for our surveillance, we had one of the courier cars go to the east and one go to the west because we had 2 complete surveillance teams operating simultaneously, and we didn't want the 2 to get crossed up with each other.
The operation went off without a hitch. 6 additional cops were videotaped in the act of drug trafficking. The FBI was about to enter the last phase of Shattered Shield, arresting the corrupt cops who would kill anyone who opposed them. After the big truck stop operation, FBI agents moved quickly on the murder of Kim Groves. They searched the house of the hitman Paul Hardy. There, agents found an unauthorized copy of a guide to police codes, the same codes that Davis used when he ordered Groves murdered. Another search at the home of one of Hardy's accomplices turned up the murder weapon, a 9mm handgun. The 2 investigations, Shattered Shield and the murder, were closing at the same time. For the ringleaders, the FBI took no chances. Agents came to Len Davis's house the next day when he was off duty.
Look, I ain't done nothing. What are you talking about? Look, I'm a police officer, man. Put your hands on top of your head.
The thug with a badge was arrested on federal drug charges and for the murder of Kim Groves. For Davis's partner, Sammy Williams, agents would use a different approach. Haddon wanted to flip Williams to the prosecution side.
At that point?
It worked.
And they decided, okay, let's throw another curveball and then let's bring Juan in. So they brought me into the door and I introduced myself, especially to Juan Jackson, the FBI. You could see the color leave his face. His world just came crashing down.
Sammy Williams turned government witness. His testimony would later prove crucial for getting convictions. Haddon and his team had no time to lose. Before news of Davis and Williams' arrests could spread, they had to deliver the rest of the gang to justice. Dozens of armed men in uniform.
The strategy we were to employ was to arrest Len Davis on December the 5th. And then on December the 6th, we had all of these officers appear before a federal grand jury. And then on December 7th, the grand jury ordered all these officers to come to the FBI office to give handwriting exemplars.
Len Davis's recruits arrived at the FBI's office to give handwriting samples for analysis together with 60 fellow officers. Since the drug ring involved no written records, and so many officers provided writing samples, the crooked cops suspected nothing. Like the others before it, the FBI's ruse worked. One by one, more than a dozen dirty cops of New Orleans were arrested.
That was a safe way to do it because obviously all of these officers were armed and they were facing very serious charges, and that was a way to do it to avoid any potential for any bloodshed or any unwanted resistance by the officers.
In court, the FBI's recordings built a solid case against the officers. The videos and audio tapes spoke louder than the code words and erased all doubts that jurors might have had. Agent Karen Jenkins knew the evidence was strong.
The jury was able to hear for themselves what the officers said. They were able to see for themselves what they were doing because of the videos that we had.
That wasn't me. It could have been anybody.
As prosecutor Al Winters had predicted early in the investigation, Davis tried to talk his way out of it.
All police officers know what that is. It's a homicide.
Even after all the safeguards we took, Davis's defense at the trial was that he was conducting his own undercover operation, that it was not really done according to the book, but, you know, he was a poor cop and didn't have a lot of training, but he was trying to conduct his own undercover operation.
Davis never admitted any wrongdoing. He didn't need to. The audio and videotape spoke for themselves. Faced with the prospect of convicting those sworn to protect them, the citizens of the jury listened intently.
The tapes were chilling, and as those tapes were played, the courtroom was as silent as a cathedral.
Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor, we have.
Will the defendant please stand?
The jury deliberated just 15 minutes.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree and hereby sentence the defendant.
Len Davis was sentenced to death for his role in Kim Grove's murder, which was later commuted to life. In 2 other trials, Davis and his co-conspirators received 18 convictions for drug trafficking. 15 officers were headed for prison. Because he cooperated with prosecutors, Sammy Williams was sentenced to just 5 years. He would never again wear a badge.
You have irrevocably stained that uniform you once wore. But I must reluctantly recognize that other crimes can only be solved with cooperation of people like you. Court dismissed.
For the Big Easy, Haddon's case brought a long, hard look in the mirror.
You know, I think that the city of New Orleans has been very tolerant of all sorts of conduct which might be considered improper in other parts of the country. It's part of the culture here, and I'm a Louisiana native. But I think this was a wake-up call to the citizens of New Orleans that there was a serious problem within the NOPD, and that problem had to be addressed.
You know, you take an oath, and I think that when you do that, there's no excuse for anything else. I think we helped. I think that now their focus is different. I think hiring, I think pay scale, I think everything about what the New Orleans Police Department is about is different.
Under Chief Pennington, the New Orleans Police Department revamped its practices and fired more rogue cops. The Big Easy had cleaned house. The department and the FBI continue to work together to bring justice to the city's streets. Organized crime tore through the suburbs of Chicago, leaving violence and corruption in its wake. Prominent officials were seduced by greed and power, doing whatever was necessary to protect their interests. Everyone was on the take.
FBI search
It would fall on the FBI to weed out the corruption and to find the killer of an innocent woman.
Willow Springs, Illinois seemed like any other quiet Midwestern community, but it was really one of the most corrupt places in the nation. This tiny village nestled just outside of Chicago was in the hip pocket of organized crime. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It was only a matter of time before corruption led to assassination and conspiracy. To end it required a federal sting operation of astounding complexity.
The bank of a sanitary canal in a remote industrial area became the site of a gruesome crime. The killers were quick and thorough. Nearby, 2 police officers were out on night patrol. When they heard the shots fired, they became alarmed. One of the officers drove towards the canal to investigate. He found nothing as he searched the desolate area.
Hey, Chief.
Also on the scene was Willow Springs, Illinois Police Chief Michael
I
Corbett.
heard it earlier myself, and I've already checked the area, so it's
He too saw nothing.
I got it covered. See you later.
The following day, a prominent local attorney called police to report that his wife was missing.
Well, Mr. Masters, we'd like to ask a few questions about your wife.
Lieutenant Howard Vanek of the Cook County Sheriff's Department and his partner responded to the call. Attorney Alan Masters said that his wife Diane had been out the night before with colleagues and friends from a local college where she worked.
After the meeting, some of the board members would go to a bar.
She never came home. There was no sign of her yellow Cadillac.
I believe it
He
starts
said he made
around
calls
7
trying to
o'clock.
locate her
She was
until
the same
2 in the
one,
morning,
I honestly
but
don't
finally
know
gave
where
up.
it is.
For the officers, the information offered little insight.
Excuse me a minute.
Lieutenant James Keating of the Cook County Sheriff's Department joined the officers.
Yeah, by all means, you can sit down.
Sir, we were just asking Mr. Masters questions about his wife's disappearance.
He asked Masters if he could have a look around the
Be
house.
happy to. Sure. Yeah, by all
Masters
means.
agreed.
No, not at
He
all.
had nothing to hide.
Have a seat.
The officers continued their questioning.
Anything else you can tell us?
As far as I
Reluctantly, Masters offered some new information.
Professor, somebody works for the college.
He suspected that his wife Diane had been having an affair.
I have no idea
Maybe
who
the
he
two
is.
lovers
No,
had
I
run
don't-
off together.
I don't know who he is or what he looks like. I just have my suspicions.
Excuse me, guys. I think we need to wrap this up.
Lieutenant Vanek wanted to investigate further and look around the house himself.
Sir, I think we need to take another look around in here.
Husbands are always suspects when their wives
I look
disappear.
around. There's nothing
Sir,
here.
we need to look around.
It's time to
Something's
go.
missing here,
Let's
sir.
go now.
But Lieutenant Keating intervened. He
Sir,
wouldn't
procedure
allow
is
it.
2 investigators always check out the scene.
In his mind, everything had checked out.
Now. Let's
Sir.
go now.
Vanek was upset. He didn't know why Keating would undermine his investigation. Outside, Keating confronted Lieutenant Vanek, telling him to back off. As far as he was concerned, Masters was not a suspect. But Vanek didn't buy it, and he let Keating know. Just as the two men were about to explode, Willow Springs Police Chief Michael Corbett arrived at the scene.
Blood easy. Come on, guys. Supposed to be on the same side. Come on, man.
Keating would have the final word.
Hey, Vanny, you're off the case. Forget it. You're off the case, man. You got that?
The question still remained, where was Diane Masters? Her disappearance grabbed the media's attention.
And Diane, if you would, please come to
She had been very active in the local community. Diane had worked hard to help open a shelter for battered women. She was also involved in local politics and sat on the board of the Moraine Valley Community
also would like to
College.
present Diane with this plaque to show
She
her
did
how
not
much we
appear to
thank
have any
her for all
enemies.
the hard work and her dedication in opening this crisis center, something that is needed desperately in this community.
But investigators began uncovering other details. It was reported by Diane's friends that her husband was controlling and abusive, and that Diane was planning to file for divorce. Assistant U.S. Attorney Tom Scorza followed the case.
We were pretty certain that what had happened here was that Diane and Alan had a regular marital dispute, sort of ordinary dispute, but that it had escalated into something much worse.
Go ahead and send him in.
Scorza's investigation soon revealed that Alan Masters was more than just a bad husband.
Hey, Al, how you doing?
It was rumored that Alan Masters had bribed local officials and police officers to secure favorable outcomes for his clients.
How'd it go? Very well. Very well. Nothing to worry
This
about at
corruption
all.
extended right to the top of law enforcement. Allegedly, Masters frequently enlisted the help of Chief Corbett.
If I don't hear about this anymore, it'll be worth every penny.
It was also rumored that Masters and Chief Corbett were involved in safeguarding some of the Chicago mob's betting and prostitution rings, which were run out of show clubs throughout suburban Cook County. But investigators were focused only on Diane's disappearance. With no evidence and few leads, that investigation stalled. Unaware of Alan Masters or his wife's disappearance, the FBI had already begun an independent investigation into the mob-controlled rackets of the Chicago area. U.S. Attorney David Stetler worked with the FBI to help unravel the prostitution operation.
Okay, thanks. At that time, there were a number of topless, bottomless joints that one could go to, and many of them were undercover fronts for prostitution. So you could go in, you could watch the naked girls dancing on the stage, and for a price, you could retreat to the back, either to a booth or a back room, and engage in one form of sexual activity or another with the dancers.
The club owners knew that their customers would spend more on drinks and prostitutes if they could use their credit cards. But the patrons were reluctant. They did not want bills arriving at their homes or businesses with charges incurred from nightclubs with seedy names. The club owners found credit card transaction companies that were willing to process the charges using false but respectable business names. Special Agent Ivan Harris of the FBI's Chicago field office was assigned to help bring down the illegal businesses.
The scam was using various companies in order to launder credit cards through their business to make it appear that businessmen were actually eating at a restaurant or using a limousine service to incur the charges when in fact they were charges for prostitution.
Larry Wright was one of the credit card transaction company owners. Wright would pick up the week's transactions from the clubs and process them through his company, National Credit Service, or NCS. One of his clients was a club owner named Joseph Marin, whose club was a front for a mob-controlled prostitution house. Wright wanted to expand his own operations. He approached Marin about setting up an illegal betting club.
She's nice. You had a chance to really interview her.
Marin was willing to help out the man who made him money.
She dances to the group.
Wright would first need to pay protection money to local police in order not to be exposed and arrested.
You feel pretty confident?
Marin was the man who could arrange that protection. Wright was more than willing to pay.
All right.
Marin arranged the meeting at the Willow Springs Police Department.
I trust him completely.
It was to take place with Police Chief Michael Corbett. It was believed that Corbett had been handpicked by the Chicago mob boss to oversee and protect their interests in and around Willow Springs.
The word on the street, of course, was that no one could do anything in Willow Springs without the permission of the chief of police, Mike Corbett. The message also was, from virtually anyone you would talk to, that he was so powerful, that he was so well connected, that nothing could ever be done about him.
I just want to make sure I don't get any unexpected visits.
Corbett agreed to help Larry Wright set up the new betting operation for a price.
Not quite yet.
In return, Corbett assured him he wouldn't get any heat from his officers.
All right.
Larry Wright was well on his way. He returned to his office at National Credit Service, operated out of a nondescript office park location. Wright worked with 2 other staff members.
Doing great. Larry, great.
But these were not ordinary employees. NCS was not just a credit card transaction service for illegal activities. It was a front for the FBI. Larry Wright was actually undercover Special Agent Larry Damron. And he and the FBI were using NCS to work their way into the heart of the corruption in Willow Springs. While local investigators struggled to unravel the disappearance of a prominent attorney's wife, the FBI had set up an undercover operation in the town of Willow Springs, just outside of Chicago. Their target, organized crime, and the corrupt police who protected them from prosecution. The undercover work was often painstaking and frustrating. FBI Special Agent Larry Damron explains the difficulties inherent in undercover work.
During the course of the undercover operation, you try to immerse yourself in what you're doing, and you try to assume that role because it's necessary for you to do that in order to accomplish anything. Oftentimes you'll hear people make comments, or you'll see people do things that in any other circumstance they would be arrested for immediately. And so what you have to remember is you're in a role and you play that role out.
Damron had heard stories about how the mob resolved problems. They were swift and violent, and their signature was unmistakable. 2 bullets in the head. There was no room for mistakes. Victor Spilatro, a player in Chicago's organized crime, approached Damron at NCS. Though Victor himself wielded little power, his brothers held tremendous influence within the mob's hierarchy. Damron was starting to move into the center of the violent Chicago underworld.
The Spilatros were one of the best-known names of mobsters in Chicago. The older brother, Tony, was the boss in Las Vegas. He represented the Chicago outfit for their interests in Las Vegas. Had been a prominent figure and had been widely mentioned in the papers, having been involved in murders and extortions and things like that.
Agent Damron quickly developed a reputation as an effective businessman in laundering money for mob operations.
We got everything back here that you need. All right, you come on back.
Sure everything's all right?
Spilatro knew of NCS's activities with the local nightclubs. They were under his control.
Really appreciate what you're doing.
Good, everything's going good with the business?
Yes, it's going great.
That's great. Good.
He told Damron he would have to pay him a cut to stay in business.
I'm glad you appreciate what we do for you. Okay, well that's really good.
Damron had no objection.
The level that we had there is we were paying protection to a fairly important aspect of the mob, the Spilatro family. And so that gave us a little bit of status, if you will. But we had absolutely no authority or anything like that in the mob. We were just workers, and our value was we made them money.
Agent Damron traveled to a remote hotel where he met with FBI Special Agent Gordon Brooks, who oversaw the undercover operation. To ensure that Damron's real identity was not compromised, the two met infrequently to exchange information. Brooks vigilantly kept tabs on Damron. The investigation was as dangerous as it was complex.
Not to worry about things.
The agent cautiously moved forward. He wanted to continue expanding the FBI's undercover operations. He used every opportunity he could to sell the idea of opening more betting and prostitution houses throughout suburban Chicago. Even with a go-ahead from the Spilatros, Damron would still need permission and protection from the police. He met with nightclub owner Joseph Marin to hash out the details of the new clubs and secure police protection. But there was a problem.
Look, I got some upsetting news.
What's up?
Their protector, Chief Corbett, had been removed by the Willow Springs City Council under suspicion of corruption. Marin knew another high-ranking law enforcement official who could provide the same protection as Corbett. Lieutenant James Keating, Cook County's vice squad supervisor.
Tell you what, he deals with me.
U.S. Attorney Tom Scorza was not surprised by the development. Keating's reputation was well known.
Okay, you feel pretty confident about this guy?
Jim Keating was a lieutenant in the Cook County Sheriff's Police Department, but if anything, the rank understated his influence. He was a very well-connected officer in a very corrupt department. He had connections with people of higher rank who were also corrupt, and so he was a key figure.
With Corbett out of the picture, the FBI shifted their focus to Keating. Damron met with him at a restaurant outside of Willow Springs.
It allows me to really concentrate on my job.
Keating said he'd have no problem helping Damron expand his operations.
One thing we need to understand is if there's a situation that comes up.
But any move Damron made would have to be approved by him.
I make the decision when something goes down.
He warned Damron to play it straight with him and his people.
He told us that the one thing that he wouldn't tolerate was if someone double-crossed him. And he said if that happened, that they'd find us with our legs on one of the streets in the area and our head on another street in the area.
As instructed by the FBI, Damron proposed another operation. A club that would be a front for prostitution.
You're gonna hold on to this.
He gave the lieutenant the first of many payments to ensure police protection.
Looks like a bonus for the guys, huh?
Before he left, Keating said he knew someone who might be able to help him. A lawyer named Alan Masters. Though he had no direct dealings with Alan Masters, Damron had heard the name mentioned by Chief Corbett.
Well, I knew that Masters was a well-known attorney on the south side of Chicago, that he had a tremendous reputation for being able to get things done, particularly in the local court system, and the scuttlebutt was that he wasn't reluctant to pay bribes or to deal with people however he needed to.
Damron continued his meetings with his case supervisor, Special Agent Gordon Brooks. Damron needed to know everything he could about Alan Masters and his relationship with Keating and Corbett.
Now, you're in with Corbett. He's dirty.
The FBI and U.S. attorneys quickly established a hierarchy within this ring of corruption.
Okay, you're making your way up to Keating? Right. I want you to...
Corbett was the king in Willow Springs, but anytime he had to do something that involved the broader Cook County, he needed to get the permission of Keating. And Keating always had to check with the ultimate fixer, Alan Masters, to make sure everything could be handled at the court level.
I can maybe get Masters interested.
As the extent of Alan Masters' criminal activity became clearer, the FBI began looking closer at his possible role in his wife's disappearance. The two distinct cases were beginning to overlap, and Damron's objectives were broadening.
Authorities call 3 counties still.
He was a suspect in the disappearance of his wife. It was thought that if we could develop a relationship with him, there might be something there that would come to light and might be of some benefit to that investigation.
Damron learned that Alan Masters allegedly made payoffs to several area judges in exchange for favorable decisions.
Now, we need to have that hearing on the Sanderson case. It needs to go our way. Do we have an understanding on that, Judge?
Agents speculated that Diane might have witnessed her husband's illegal activity and threatened to expose him.
I think we can come to terms with that. Right this way, sir.
Now trying to elicit information about Diane's disappearance, Damron continued his efforts to make inroads into the corruption around Willow Springs. He met with Keating several weeks later to follow up on his plan to open a show club.
A good manager lined up.
Oh, I've got a
Again,
friend,
Keating mentioned that his friend Alan Masters
friend
could
that,
help.
can take care of that. He's a real fixer.
Damron took the opportunity to bring up Alan's wife. Keating said little, but then added an unusual comment.
The same plan we had with the other one.
Probably heard him, seen him.
We talked about Masters' wife turning up missing, and Keating said, well, she turned up missing like the day before the divorce was going to be filed.
That was convenient, wasn't it?
It was convenient.
And chuckled about what a good circumstance that was.
Damron was cautious not to probe too far, fearing that Keating might grow suspicious.
You've known this fella for a long time?
Yeah.
You've known him for a while. I've worked with him before.
Sure, he can do.
As the meeting ended, Keating handed over Alan Masters' phone number, saying the lawyer was expecting his
You
call.
won't be implicated.
I just need them each lined up. I'm going with the same.
He proceeded to set up the meeting with Alan Masters.
Hello? Mr. Masters, how are you? This is Larry Wright speaking.
The attorney agreed to help push through all the necessary permits and legal documents, which meant bribing officials and securing protection.
Yeah, we've been working pretty hard on it for a while now.
Well, soon I think it'd be a pretty
Masters
good
suggested
location.
they get together.
Talking about,
The meeting was set for the following week, Monday, December 13th.
okay, I'll look forward to meeting you then. I think we can maybe do some business.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Before the meeting would take place, however, a police officer on routine patrol near the sanitary canal area in Willow Springs noticed something unusual. Tire tracks led directly into the canal. He immediately called for assistance. Little did he know that the lid was about to come off the underworld in Willow Springs.
Find these trucks out here and mark.
While the FBI continued their undercover operation in the Chicago suburb of Willow Springs, an officer out on routine patrol made an alarming discovery. Tire tracks leading directly into the sanitary canal. Police officers and a dive team responded to the site. Overseeing the investigation was James Ross, an honest cop appointed by City Council to replace Michael Corbett as the police chief in Willow Springs. Though Corbett had been ousted from the department, his legacy of corruption remained. Below the surface, divers found a virtual underwater parking lot. 82 cars lined the bottom of the polluted canal. U.S. Attorney Tom Scorza believed he knew why the cars were there. And who could make a profit by allowing them to be dumped without a police investigation?
Those are known as insurance give-ups, people who want to collect money on their car when the car is not worth very much anymore will find a way of losing the car and then reporting it stolen and collect the insurance. My belief was that Corbett had been the approver of all of the dumping of the cars in the Willow Springs Canal.
By nighttime, a third car had been dredged up, a yellow Cadillac. The license plate on the vehicle, DGM-19, was well known in Willow Springs. It was the tag registered to Diane Masters. Lieutenant Keating of the Cook County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene. Chief Ross was surprised that Keating, a vice cop, had been notified. He asked Keating why he was there. Keating had no response. Officers continued examining the Cadillac. When they pried open the trunk, they discovered a decomposed body. Ross immediately ordered that the car and the body be taken back to a city garage where they could be thoroughly examined for clues. The decision not to use the police garage was well reasoned. Chief Ross knew this case potentially had far-reaching implications, and he couldn't trust his own officers. The fewer people nosing around, the better. State police began to scour the car and the body for evidence. They found .22 caliber shell casings in the trunk. The keys were still in the ignition. Eerily, the watch on the deceased body and the dashboard clock had stopped at exactly the same time, 1:50. They removed the body for further forensic investigation. The forensic team examining the body found the skull had been crushed. They also discovered 2 bullet hole entries in the left cheekbone. The bullet fragments inside the skull were removed and sent off to the FBI lab for ballistic evaluation. Dental records confirmed what everyone believed. The body found in the trunk was Diane Masters. The 9-month investigation into Diane's disappearance was now a homicide investigation.
Come on in.
Chief Ross called in Cook County Detective John Reed to work the homicide. He was to team up with the FBI, who was now taking over the murder investigation. Detective Reed was not to trust even his closest friends in the department. He was told that through the FBI undercover operation run out of NCS, law enforcement officers were being investigated for corruption. And some had ties to Alan Masters, who was now a firm suspect in Diane's murder. As Agent Harris and Detective Reed initiated their murder investigation, Agent Damron continued his undercover operation.
Today to set up a time and place for our meeting.
He called Alan Masters to confirm their meeting to set up the show club.
I'm jammed. I expect to be in court all day tomorrow. I'm sorry.
Well,
Masters was evasive and
next
seemed
week's
distracted.
Okay too, if that's okay with you.
Maybe we can work something out then. Just give me some time.
He canceled the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Wright.
Damron immediately called Keating. With the conversation being recorded by the FBI, he hoped Keating would explain why Masters was being evasive.
No, I was wondering if you had any information on that. As I said, he's pretty busy. How about if you give me a call in 3 or 4 weeks?
But Keating was cryptic.
Maybe we can work something out then.
He instructed Damron not to bother Masters. He had too many problems to deal with.
Okay, bye.
The new show club would have to wait.
What do you got for me? Here are the transcripts.
Damron met with Agent Brooks. Masters and Keating both appeared nervous since Diane's body had been discovered. But that was hardly enough evidence to prosecute either of them for murder. Perhaps Damron had overlooked something. He handed over his tape-recorded conversations with Keating.
This is gonna nail him. We're gonna get him.
Can you play that again, please?
Over the next several months, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Cook County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI began the process of merging the various investigations.
All right. Well,
The link between them was Alan Masters, Cook County Lieutenant James Keating, and former Willow Springs Police Chief Michael Corbett.
If that's the case,
It would fall on prosecutors to begin constructing a case proving that the 3 men and all of their activities represented an ongoing, organized criminal enterprise.
We can get the RICO prosecution happening.
And what we had to do in order to prosecute Masters and Corbett and Keating for a collection of their activities, including the homicide, we had to show that they made up a criminal organization, a mini mafia.
Appreciate you meeting with us tonight, Mrs. Capstaff.
Well, if you guys don't
Detective Reed and Agent Harris's first step was to question Diane's friends who had been with her on the night she disappeared.
Okay.
You said that you followed her home that night.
One of Diane's colleagues, Genevieve Capstaff, had actually followed Diane home that evening after a board meeting.
And so I just wanted to see, so I followed her.
Capstaff claimed everyone on the Moraine Community College Board who worked with Diane suspected that she was having an affair with an economics professor. She admitted that she wanted to see if the two were going to rendezvous. She followed Diane to her street. When Diane turned to go home, Capstaff continued on.
Is there anything else that you can tell me?
Further
that
questioning revealed that all of the community college board members, including Diane, were given a $100,000 life insurance policy as part of their employment benefits.
$100,000.
Right, yes, but that only covers...
The policy specifically stated that proceeds would be paid if a board member died while traveling to and from board meetings. The policy was void when the board member entered their home.
That's all, but...
We appreciate your
Alan Masters claimed Diane never arrived home that night. He was therefore eligible to collect the insurance money. Several months before Diane's body was discovered in the trunk of her car, Masters filed a claim with the insurance company. After filling out all the paperwork, he sent it off. Though Diane's fate at that time was unclear, Masters had a judge declare her legally dead. As a result, he was about to receive $100,000. Alan Masters was fast becoming the FBI's prime suspect in the murder of his wife, Diane. Shortly after her body was discovered, investigators learned that he had filed a claim with his wife's insurance company. Within a few months, 2 checks appeared in the amount of $50,000 each. If federal agents and prosecutors could prove Masters was responsible for his wife's death and that he profited from it, it would be one more element that showed that he and his accomplices were involved in an ongoing criminal enterprise. Homicide in a federal racketeering case carries much more jail time than a state charge. As the investigation began to take on a clearer focus, FBI agents working the undercover case received bad news.
Listen, we're going to have to move rather quickly on this.
The Washington Post had gotten word of the operation.
Listen, we're having a bit of a problem.
We're almost at the point where we can really make some impact.
The Post gave the FBI 3 weeks to wrap it up before running the story.
We have some have to be closed down. Is that right? Yeah, something like that.
All 16.
Agents had no choice but to quickly bring their undercover operations to a close.
Here, so please do me a favor.
For U.S. Attorney David Stetler, the timing couldn't have been better.
The project had run its course, and the bulk of the information anybody was ever going to get had been retrieved, and to make the operation go on longer would have resulted in additional evidence, but it also would have resulted in the evidence that had been gathered becoming more and more stale.
Agents had meticulously pieced together the web of corruption that extended to the nightclubs under mob control. Now it was time to shut them down.
Yo, FBI, open the door. Open the door.
The FBI hit all of the clubs on the same night with massive force. Several hundred officers and agents raided over a dozen clubs throughout Cook County, including those in Willow Springs.
Stay right here. Go on in, bro. Stay right here.
Sit tight.
We haven't done anything. All
right, hands behind your back.
This ain't helping anything. Shut up.
Inside the clubs, federal agents were able to collect volumes of incriminating evidence. 55 people were indicted, including club owner Joseph Margaret, Tony Spilatro, and his brother Victor. They were prosecuted in both the state and federal courts for extortion, prostitution, bribery, and racketeering. Several deputies from the Cook County Sheriff's Department and officers from the Willow Springs Police Department were also indicted and convicted for protecting these businesses. After 3 years of undercover work, the sting operation was now officially closed.
What's your friend's name?
For undercover Special Agent Larry Damron, it was finally time to leave the role of Larry Wright.
I would say the finish was elation and disappointment at the same time. Disappointment that there were so many opportunities out there to identify other criminal activity. We knew that it was a good job, that we had gathered tremendous amounts of evidence, and that we had a real insight into some of the criminal activity that was taking place that we hadn't had before.
Alan Masters.
Local authorities, the FBI, and prosecutors could now focus exclusively on the Diane Masters murder investigation.
She said he hit her.
They continued questioning her friends and associates, including the man with whom she was allegedly having an affair.
There were other things that happened.
Economics professor Jim Koselniak. He confirmed that he and Diane had a relationship. He also claimed that Masters had abused Diane physically, mentally, and emotionally. She lived in fear of her husband. Diane had told him she planned to file for divorce. Koselniak also had reason to fear Alan Masters. One night, Koselniak and Diane had met for drinks at a local bar. He recalled that Diane called home to check on her daughter. Instead of getting the babysitter on the phone, Alan unexpectedly answered.
Alan?
He suspected she was with her lover.
I didn't know you were
He was
in trouble.
irate and began to
I
threaten
was
her.
calling to check on Andra.
He vowed to destroy her. Koselniak said Diane returned from the phone call and was very upset. He went to the bar for more drinks. There, a man suddenly confronted him and began firing off a series of questions.
Yes, I did.
The man never identified himself.
10, 12 years.
What's your name?
He asked Koselniak's name and where he worked.
Koselniak.
Koselniak.
Though the man said little else, Koselniak felt he had just received a threat. Stay away from Diane.
And
Koselniak would later recognize the man as Lieutenant James Keating. He said that on the night of Diane's disappearance, she had called him and warned him not to meet her for drinks.
So this was an unusual move on her part.
They usually got together after her college board meetings.
What was the tone of voice?
Lately, she had been troubled by Alan's behavior.
That they were going to another restaurant.
Koselniak took her advice and
again,
canceled their
Met
plans.
at the same place.
He never saw Diane again.
The meeting was always straight to RDG.
As a matter of fact, they're on the way now.
Agent Harris and Detective Reed continued to develop witnesses.
Hey, glad you could come by.
They discovered that Masters had hired a private investigator to keep tabs on Diane.
That his wife Diane.
We subsequently developed a cooperating individual named Ted Nakaza, who was a private investigator with Alan Masters. Masters had requested Ted Nakaza to place a bug on his home telephone number because he suspected his wife Diane was having an affair.
I got a few tapes.
Hey, what do you guys got for me?
Nakaza told investigators the bug was successful in exposing Diane and Koselniak's affair.
Good news.
Ted Nikaza played back a telephone conversation captured on tape where Diane was talking in a highly sexual way with the boyfriend, Jim Koselniak. According to Nikaza, after playing the tape, Alan Masters declared his intention to kill Diane and to get Keating to make it look like an accident.
Alan Masters wanted his wife murdered, and he had the resources to get away with it.
You gotta stay cool.
The FBI and local authorities continued to uncover evidence against Alan Masters and his associates that pointed towards a conspiracy to murder Alan's wife, Diane. Through a private investigator hired by Alan Masters, Diane's affair had been exposed.
His wife was cheating.
Alan's
Masters
rage
had
was
all
out of
the
control.
Yes.
But investigators had no hard evidence to charge him with murder. After an exhaustive 5-year investigation, that was about to change.
He intended to have Diane killed.
They uncovered a Cook County Sheriff's deputy who was willing to talk.
Agent Harris.
Deputy Jack Bachman had startling information.
Keating brought me into his
Bachman
office.
had been too afraid of the consequences of coming forward on his own. He claimed that he had been approached to kill Diane. The offer had come through Lieutenant James Keating.
Bachman had a series of conversations with Keating, and ultimately Keating asked Bachman if Bachman would be interested in the job of actually stalking and killing Diane Masters.
Bachman said Keating offered him $25,000 to carry out the hit.
And
Michael Corbett, the chief of police, had already agreed to dispose of the body. Bachman declined the offer.
No, sir, I'm sorry. I can't get involved in anything like that. No, no, sir.
Through Keating, Masters had clearly solicited a
discreet
murder.
about this meeting we just had, and
Well, no, but he did offer me $25,000.
This was one of the final pieces prosecutor Scorza needed to bring an indictment.
He said he wanted to eliminate her. I said, what do you mean by
What we were able to show is that when Alan Masters decided to kill his wife, he simply was able to turn to the two police officers that he'd already been working with on corrupt activities and criminal activities. And that made the homicide and the planning of it and the solicitation of it, it made it an activity of the criminal enterprise.
The pieces had finally come together.
And Diane Masters decided
Investigators put together a likely scenario of Diane Masters' murder.
She said she heard something.
Alan Masters had found a hitman to kill Diane and her boyfriend when they met for the usual drinks after her college board meeting. However, Diane didn't meet with Koselniak that evening.
You're home late tonight.
The meeting ran late.
Furious, Masters took matters into his own hands.
Alan Masters was at home babysitting their young daughter. He was setting up his alibi by making long-distance calls all night to prove that he was home. He never expected his wife to walk in the door. She did. She began the process of getting undressed, and he hit her with a blunt instrument, 2 blows to the head.
Masters then called Chief Corbett, who came with an unknown accomplice to dispose of the body. They dumped Diane's body in the trunk of her Cadillac. Corbett then drove away with the accomplice following him. Masters remained at home with his daughter. They drove to the remote sanitary canal. Diane's watch was reset to throw investigators off the trail should her body ever be found. They then fired 2 shots into her head. They wanted it to look like a mob hit. They also reset the dashboard clock to 1:50. Alan Masters made sure that he was on the phone at the time to corroborate his alibi. Corbett and the accomplice dumped the Cadillac into the canal. In June of 1988, 6 years after Diane's murder, investigators brought charges against the three conspirators. Former police chief Michael Corbett was the first arrested on federal charges of racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy to solicit and cover up the murder of Diane Masters. Special Agent Ivan Harris tried to elicit a confession.
Mike Corbett subsequently confessed that he was in fact the person that had put Diane Masters' car in the canal. He disavowed any knowledge, knowing that she was in the trunk of the car at that time.
Cook County Lieutenant James Keating was arrested next on the same federal charges. He too denied involvement in Diane's murder. And finally, Alan Masters. In addition to racketeering and bribery, the indictment against Alan Masters charged that he planned, solicited, and aided and abetted the murder of his wife.
If you wish one.
Prosecutors would not have enough hard evidence to charge any of the conspirators with the actual murder of Diane. Prosecutor Tom Scorza was able to successfully tie all of their criminal activities together for the jury. Masters was convicted on all counts. Collecting the $100,000 insurance money after having his wife murdered also made him guilty of mail fraud. He received a total of 40 years, effectively to the end of his life. Former Chief Michael Corbett received 20 years. James Keating was convicted and sentenced to over 30 years.
The Masters case was special in my experience because there was no one single piece of evidence proving guilt. What there were 1,000 little pieces that made a mosaic. That was made the case intriguing. It made it very difficult to present. It made it a challenge to present to the jury, but it made a terrific story because in the end the jury could see how one little piece from over here and one little piece from over there made a picture, and the picture was a plot among three fellows who had been involved in a lot of criminal activity to do their ultimate criminal act, murder Diane Masters.
Watch yourself.
The undercover investigation that Agent Damron oversaw, and the work of several other FBI agents, exposed a deeply rooted corruption throughout Cook County and brought it to its ultimate demise. By weeding out these pockets of corruption, the people living in the suburbs of Chicago no longer have to live with the lawlessness that threatened to destroy their community.